The warm glow of the overhead lights in the dining facility bathed the room in a comfortable ambience. Binnaker, with her Italian heritage on full display, had outdone herself again. The rich smell of freshly made pasta, garlic bread, and savoury sauces filled the air as Eli, Karina, Shade, and Ashley gathered around the large oak table, plates filled with delicious food. Eli twirled her fork through a mound of spaghetti, her eyes darting between the others, amusement twinkling in her gaze. "You know, Binnaker, you should be careful. We're going to start expecting this kind of feast every night." Binnaker laughed from the kitchen, where she was still working on dessert. "Don't worry, Eli. There's plenty more where that came from." Ashley, sitting beside Eli, smiled as she took a bite of the creamy fettuccine. "I could get used to this," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I don't think I've had a meal this good since, well, ever." Karina, usually quiet during meals, seemed lost in thought as she picked at her plate. The day's training with Shade weighed on her mind. She was learning more about herself, more about the shadows and her connection to them. But it was also stirring things deep inside her, things she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. Yet the warmth and laughter around the table made her feel at ease, if only for a little while. Shade, ever the silent observer, sat across from her, his plate only half eaten. His dark eyes flickered toward her every so often, but he remained withdrawn, as if the casual atmosphere was something foreign to him. "You barely touched your food," Eli said to Shade, leaning back in her chair and gesturing at his plate. "Don't tell me the shadows are enough to keep you full." Shade quirked an eyebrow, a hint of a smirk tugging at his lips. "I don't need much. Old habits die hard, I suppose." Karina looked up from her plate. "You should eat," she said quietly, surprising herself. She had spent so many years on her own, living on survival instincts. Seeing Shade like this reminded her of those darker days. He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. With a small nod, Shade picked up his fork and took another bite, though his expression remained distant. A walk in the shadows. After dinner, the group parted ways. Karina felt restless, her mind still churning over the day's events. As she stepped outside into the cool evening air, she heard footsteps behind her. It was Shade. "Care for a walk?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. She nodded, and together they walked in silence for a while, the shadows of the night casting long shapes over the grounds. The stars twinkled faintly above, and the faint hum of the night surrounded them. Shade finally broke the silence. "You've been doing well with your training. Better than I expected." Karina glanced at him, her brow furrowing. "It's strange," she admitted. "It feels like I've known how to do this all along, like it was always there, waiting." "That's because it was," Shade said, his gaze fixed on the dark horizon. "Your powers were always part of you, even before you understood them." Karina's thoughts turned to the fragments of memories she had begun to recover. The shadows. They're not just a tool, are they? They're connected to who I am. Shade nodded. "Yes. You're not just anyone, Karina. You're the Princess of Nythoria, and that comes with more than just a title." She stopped walking, her eyes narrowing. "You've always known, haven't you, that I wasn't just an assassin?" Shade paused, turning to face her fully. His expression was unreadable, but there was a heaviness in his eyes, a weight that had been there for a long time. "There's something I've kept from you," he admitted, his voice low. "I wasn't just anyone either before all of this. I was the captain of the house guard for your parents. My real name isn't Shade, it's Zariel." Karina blinked, the revelation hitting her harder than she expected. "Zariel," she whispered, testing the name on her tongue. Shade, Zariel, looked away for a moment before continuing. "When the trader took you, he betrayed us all. He knocked me unconscious, and by the time I came to, you were gone. I failed you and your family, and I've been living in the shadows ever since." Karina took a step closer to him, her voice soft. "Why didn't you tell me?" Zariel's eyes met hers, filled with remorse. I didn't think you'd ever step into your role. I didn't think you'd want to be that person. But now, seeing you embrace your powers, I realize I was wrong. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of Zariel's confession settling between them. You didn't fail me, Karina said finally, her voice steady. We were both taken from what we knew. But now, we have a chance to set things right. Zariel nodded, his expression softening as he regarded her with newfound respect. You've grown stronger than I ever could have imagined, Princess. Karina's heart swelled, but she kept her face calm, her gaze steady. We'll need that strength to face what's coming. They resumed walking, the bond between them stronger than ever, as the shadows followed in their wake. The morning sun had barely risen when Karina and Zariel returned to the workshop, ready for their second round of testing with Eli. After last night's revelations, Karina felt more connected to her powers, more confident in who she was becoming. But there was still so much to learn, both about herself and about the people around her. Eli was already waiting, her arms crossed as she leaned against her workbench. The crystal detection system from their last attempt sat on the table, but this time it had been upgraded. Wires ran from it to an array of runes engraved into the walls, and a faint hum of magic filled the air, promising something far more formidable than before. You're not getting through this time, Eli said confidently, glancing between Karina and Zariel. This system is much stronger now. It won't just detect you, it'll stop you. Karina raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. Stop me. Eli nodded. If you try to shadow walk past the wards, it'll knock you out of the shadows and prevent you from blending in. You'll be forced out into the open. Zariel, standing beside Karina, watched Eli with a faint smile. And me? Eli gave him a knowing look. You'll have a harder time too. I won't make it easy. Karina smirked, feeling a rush of determination. Let's see what you've got. Testing the shadows. Karina took a deep breath as she stepped outside the workshop, ready to attempt shadow walking through Eli's wards. The shadows felt familiar now, more like an extension of herself than ever before. She slipped into them easily, blending with the darkness as she moved toward the entrance. But just as she neared the door, a sharp pulse of energy erupted from the wards. Karina felt a force slam into her, knocking her out of the shadows. She stumbled forward, exposed and unable to blend back in. Eli's voice echoed from inside. Told you. Karina shook her head, regaining her balance. The wards had worked exactly as Eli said they would, and she could feel the magic suppressing her ability to merge with the shadows. She tried again, but the moment she moved, the system responded, pushing her back into the light. From the doorway, Eli stood watching, a satisfied smirk on her face. It's not going to let you in this time. You're grounded. Karina let out a frustrated breath, but couldn't help admiring Eli's work. The system was effective. Too effective. Trotase, Shade's test. Now it was Zariel's turn. He glanced at Karina before slipping into the shadows himself, his movements fluid and seamless. As he approached the wards, he could feel their power. The system was strong, stronger than he expected. But Zariel had years of experience, and while the detection wards flared brightly, pushing back against him, he managed to move deeper inside. Eli watched closely, her brow furrowing as she saw him make it further than Karina had. The system struggled to keep up with him, and though it detected him, it didn't prevent him from slipping in. He wasn't invisible. He could feel the wards tugging at the edges of his presence, but he was still able to bypass them, albeit with difficulty. Finally, Zariel stepped through the doorway, the shadows peeling away as he reappeared on the other side. He looked at Eli with a hint of amusement in his eyes. Impressive, he said, but it's not enough to stop me, not yet. Eli huffed in frustration but nodded. You were closer than last time, but I'll make it work. Next time, you won't get through. A walk in the past. Later that evening, after a long day of training and testing, Karina found herself walking the grounds again. Zariel walked beside her, silent for the first few minutes as they passed the familiar landmarks of the pack's home. Karina's thoughts drifted back to their training session and the memories that had surfaced during her practice. The shadows had brought back fragments of her life before, glimpses of her family, of Nythoria before it was sealed away. She felt closer to her past, but it was still fragmented, elusive. I still don't know everything, Karina said quietly, breaking the silence. There's so much I don't remember, so much I need to know. Zariel glanced at her, his expression softening. The memories will come, but they won't come all at once. Karina frowned, her thoughts heavy. It's frustrating. I feel like I'm on the edge of something, but it's just out of reach. Zariel nodded, his gaze drifting toward the sky. I know the feeling, but you're stronger than you think, Karina. You've survived more than most could handle. The rest will come when it's time. She turned to him, searching his face. Do you really believe that? He met her gaze, his eyes filled with quiet resolve. Yes. And when the time comes, I'll be here to help you. I swore an oath to you, and I'll honor that. For the first time in a long while, Karina felt a flicker of hope. She still had a long way to go, but she wasn't alone. With Zariel at her side and Eli working tirelessly on the security measures, they were making progress, slowly but surely. And with the traders still out there, they needed every advantage they could get. The moon hung low on the horizon, its silver light just beginning to peek through the trees surrounding the pack's compound. Zariel had spent the day reflecting on the words he would say tonight, but before he made any grand gestures, there was something else he needed to do, something more personal. Rather than calling everyone to the courtyard right away, he wanted to speak with the pack members individually as a way of understanding their bond with Karina and reinforcing his own connection with them. After all, these were the people she now considered family. Zariel began with Ashley, who was outside working on her combat drills, her movements sharp and controlled. She noticed his approach but didn't pause in her training. You've been training hard, Zariel said, leaning against a nearby tree. Ashley grunted in response, wiping the sweat from her brow. Have to keep sharp. This pack is my family, and there's always something coming. Zariel nodded, watching her. You care about them. About her. Ashley gave him a sidelong glance. Karina's one of us now. We protect our own. There was a pause before Zariel spoke again, more gently. Tonight, I'll be asking for something important from all of you. An oath. I need to know if you'll stand with her, even when things get hard. Ashley stopped her drills and turned to face him fully. I'm Pack. That means I stand with her, no matter what. Her voice was resolute, her loyalty clear. But she's strong. Don't underestimate her. Zariel smiled faintly. I never have. Next, Zariel found Eli in her workshop, surrounded by blueprints and arcane instruments. She barely looked up from her work when he entered, her focus entirely on a gadget she was fine-tuning. I assume this isn't just a social visit, Eli remarked, tightening a bolt on the device before turning to face him. Zariel approached her workbench, taking in the various bits of tech strewn across it. I wanted to talk to you about Karina, about what's happening tonight. Eli leaned back against the table, crossing her arms. She's come a long way. But if this is about protection, you know I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but there was an underlying warmth that only those close to her knew. Zariel nodded. It's more than that. Karina is stepping into a role she never expected. I want her to know she's not alone. Eli smirked. She's not. And she'll never be. She glanced at him with a raised eyebrow. You really care about her, don't you? Zariel met her gaze, his expression softening. She's more than a princess to me. She's part of something bigger now, and I'll do whatever it takes to see her succeed." Eli's smirk grew into a full smile. "Good, then we're on the same page." Ta! Finally, Zariel found Nythoria at the training field, watching over the facility recruits as they sparred. Her keen eyes missed nothing, and her stance was that of someone who was always ready for action. When she saw Zariel approach, she waved the recruits off for a break and walked over to meet him. "You've got something on your mind," she observed. "I do," Zariel admitted, glancing at the trainees. "Tonight I'll be renewing my oath to Karina. I wanted to know where you stand." Nythoria tilted her head, considering him carefully. "Karina's had a hard life, but she's here now and she's fighting. I respect that." Zariel nodded. "Will you be there tonight? Will you stand with her?" Nythoria's eyes hardened with determination. "I've got her back. Always." The gathering. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the compound, the members of the pack began gathering in the courtyard. The full moon was rising, bathing the area in a cool, silvery light. The pack stood in a loose circle, the air filled with quiet anticipation. Zariel, now standing with Karina by his side, looked out at the pack he had spoken with earlier. Ashley, Eli, and Nythoria stood, their eyes trained on him. They were ready. "I've asked you all here tonight," Zariel began, his voice steady but full of emotion, "because I need you to witness what is about to happen. Karina, or rather Kaelithra, is not just one of us. She is the last princess of Nythoria. And tonight, I will renew the oath I made to her and her family." He turned to Karina, his gaze softening. "And I ask that all of you, her family, her pack, stand with her as well." The full moon hung heavy in the sky, casting a pale light over the courtyard as the pack stood in quiet anticipation. The cool night air was thick with tension as Zariel knelt before Kaelithra, his dark eyes reflecting the moonlight. The shadows around them shifted and flickered as if they were alive, waiting for the moment to unfold. "Kaelithra of Nythoria." Zariel's voice was low but strong, his words carrying the weight of a lifetime of loyalty. "I, Zariel, once the captain of your family's house guard, kneel before you once more. I swear, on my life and on the shadows that have guided me, to protect you and your lineage. No force will ever break my oath again. I am yours, to command." His head remained bowed as he spoke, his devotion clear in every syllable. The pack stood in silence, watching with solemn expressions. Eli, Ashley, and Nythoria exchanged glances, sensing the gravity of the moment. Kaelithra, now fully stepping into her role as the Princess of Nythoria, took a deep breath. The title felt foreign but also familiar, as though she had worn it in another life. She looked down at Zariel, her heart pounding. For the first time, she fully embraced her birthright. "I accept your oath, Zariel," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. She raised her hand, touching it lightly to his forehead. "And I bless you in the name of our ancestors and the shadows that have always protected us." The moment her hand touched him, something inside her shifted. A wave of power surged through her body, stronger than anything she had ever felt before. The memory ward, which had kept her true identity hidden for so long, shattered. Suddenly, the floodgates opened. Memories, both beautiful and terrible, rushed into her mind all at once. Her childhood in Nythoria, her parents, the betrayal by the trader, and the overwhelming darkness that consumed her realm. It all came crashing down on her like a tidal wave, threatening to drown her in its force. Kaelithra's knees buckled as the surge of power overwhelmed her. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet, and her vision blurred. The shadows around her pulsed and flickered violently, growing denser and darker with each passing second. "Kaelithra!" Zariel's voice was filled with alarm as he reached out to steady her, but the darkness around them had taken on a life of its own. Eli's device, which had been designed to monitor and detect any supernatural disturbances, began to spark and whine. The sudden overload of energy sent it into a frenzy, and with a sharp crack, the entire device exploded, sending shards of crystal scattering across the courtyard. "Get back!" Eli shouted, trying to contain the magical backlash, but it was too late. The shadows surged forward, swallowing Kaelithra whole. One moment she was there, and the next she was gone, disappearing into the shadows without a trace. The pack stood frozen in shock, the courtyard eerily silent after the chaotic explosion. Ashley and Desiree rushed forward, their faces pale with fear. Eli, her eyes wide with disbelief, stared at the smouldering remains of her device. "She's gone," Zariel whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. He knelt where she had stood, his eyes searching the darkness for any sign of her. But there was nothing, just the lingering shadows that had taken her. "What just happened?" Ashley asked, her voice shaky. "I don't know," Eli muttered, her gaze darting around the courtyard. "But whatever it wasn't supposed to happen like this." Zariel stood slowly, his fists clenched at his sides. The tension in the air was palpable as the pack members exchanged uneasy glances. "What do we do now?" Desiree asked quietly, her voice barely audible. "We find her," Zariel said, his voice hardening with determination. "No matter what it takes, we get her back."
Well, you found your way to the end, haven't you? That must mean you're curious, and we love curiosity around here. Before you vanish into the ether, take a moment to subscribe. It's just a click, and trust me, you'll want to stay in the loop for what comes next. And while you're at it, give the video a like. The energy exchange is good for you. Hit that notification bell too. You wouldn't want to miss out on any of our magical misadventures. Who knows what I might conjure up next? Alright, off you go. But remember, I'll know if you didn't subscribe. See you on the other side.